Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually jump off on that point because I'm not sure I agree that the strongest response that the U.S. could have had to the balloon incident, let's call it that, was to not go to Beijing. It might have been an even stronger response to get there and confront the Chinese on their own territory about what has been happening here. And there's a lot of details that are emerging and coming out. Here's what I do know, and I hope everyone's hearing this on more or less a bipartisan basis, but whether it's CFIUS, FIRMA, the Export Control Relief Act, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, there's been a fair amount of work that has been done. I've been very critical, frankly, of the PCAOB and its agreement with Beijing that allows U.S. investors to scrutinize really a small subset of audit firms and even a smaller sampling of the transactions and audits. And what I'm concerned about is, whether China can ever provide an actual safe, stable business climate for U.S. investors. And I am curious, real quickly, if you can comment, and we'll go right down the row here. How can and should our regulators ensure investors have some modicum of protection of what they're investing in? Mr. Eshoo?
Yep. It starts with information. I think, as a former regulator, we
so transparency.
Transparency, but really I consider it direct communication.
Okay.
I think the government has a responsibility to share with affected industries what it can about the particular environment, in this case China.
Okay.
And gathering that information in the first place is also quite critical.
Right. Mr. Fetto?
I completely agree with Mr. Eshoo. The transparency is paramount.
Right. Mr. Lorber?
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I can't speak to that specific issue, but transparency as a general matter, both for investor protection and for financial crimes compliance, is incredibly important.
Okay. Mr. Willems, do you have anything?
It sounds good to me.
Mr. Earl, why not?
I will join my colleagues on transparency.
All right. Well, so, here we have, though, the PCAOB has been tasked with negotiating this out. I'm not sure that we've really seen it be as tough as it is, because it seems like it's being controlled more by Beijing. And look, I and many others have been critical of Russian companies who are listed on the U.S. exchanges as well. And how long are we going to let the PCAOB take this same posture with the Chinese government before we take a more strong, robust posture with China, as we have tried to do with Russia and some others? Mr. Willems, I'm going to kind of stick in with the IFIs, the International Financial Institutions, the IMF Reform Act and Integrity Act, which I've introduced in the last 2 consecutive Congresses, would place greater restrictions on major shareholders of the fund, notably China and Russia. Specifically, the legislation would ensure that any quota increases by the IMF would be done with consideration as to whether a country is following certain principles of the fund, most notably currency manipulation. The bill is complementary to my colleague Mr. Hill's Special Drawing Rights Oversight Act, which again draws attention to Russia's lack of adherence to international lending standards. Mr. Williams, you noted in your testimony that the United States should seek to change the way China does business, close quote, and the need for it to be, quote, responsible international stakeholder, close quote. Can you help the committee understand how important it is for the IMF to hold China and other major shareholders responsible for their actions?
So let me just say, I think your legislation makes a lot of sense, and in particular this concept that we need to create standards within these institutions that hold China to account. I think it's difficult for us, whether it's the World Bank or the IMF, and to come in and simply say, we want China to do this or we want China to do that. That can make it, I think, sometimes difficult to gain broader support for it. But if we create a standard that we know China can't meet and use that as an objective standard, I think that can be more effective within those institutions.
Okay. Well, U.S. companies often face considerable disadvantage to their Chinese counterparts, which often receive large state subsidies and those kinds of things. And so I'm curious, what is the most effective tool, in your opinion, that we in Congress can wield to level that playing field without harming or impacting open and fair domestic markets as well?
So on the subsidies question, there's a couple things we can do, and I see I only have like 3 seconds, but quickly I would say defense and offense. On the defense side, where there are Chinese subsidies, we have trade tools to countervail that. On the offensive side, we need to provide alternatives.
And maybe it would be helpful, Mr. Chairman, if we could get a response in
Gentleman's
writing
time's
on that.
expired. We can
Thank you,
do
I yield
a
back.
written response.